Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have meme researcher and guy who does all kinds of cool stuff, Aidan Walker, in the back room with us today. We'll chat with him in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Aidan Walker is a writer, creator, and internet culture researcher. He has covered memes and tech for the BBC, The Daily Beast, and other outlets. He posts on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram as @Aidan, etc., and writes the Substack newsletter, How to Do Things with Memes. Aidan, welcome into the back room.
Happy to be here, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I want to start off with the basics. Correct me if I'm wrong, you're 26? Do I have that right?
26.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go back in time. Tell me about your family, your parents, where you grew up, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I grew up in Arlington, Virginia, which is the missing part of the square that used to be Washington, D.C. Virginia took back a little piece of it at some point. And so I grew up there.
I'm sure Trump will be taking that back soon.
Yeah, he'll be reclaiming it.
Yeah,
you know, it's more room for extra ballrooms, or a triumphal arch is the latest thing.
Right. That's where the Trump arch might be. Yeah, Arc de Trump.
Over in Virginia. Yeah. But so my parents were diplomats, so I lived some of my childhood in Yemen and Syria, and then the rest of it in the DC area. And I went to college, Portland, Oregon, to read college, studied English, really fascinated by literature and poetry and history. And I thought, I'd love to pursue a career looking at this stuff. But then one day I was looking at my phone and I was looking at some memes on Instagram, and I was sort of like, kind of the same thing that I'm studying in class, it's a folk art tradition, but there's this same thing going on where there's certain forms and people are pressing against them, and there's talking about sort of the deep issues that matter to people, the things that people are confused about, things people are trying to figure out. And so from there, I got really into digital culture. And then after college, I worked for a little bit at a media archaeology lab on really early 90s.
Yeah, you're going too fast. You left out Colombia. Yeah. You left out your amazing thesis on the distracted boyfriend meme. I want to ask you about that for a second. But let's go back just a little bit. What kind of kid were you when you were 8 or 9? Were you sitting there with your gadgets, or were you out playing football? What were you doing?
I wasn't a gadget kid. Wasn't really a football kid either. I was always more of a English class kid, history kid. Virginia, there's a lot of Civil War battlefields, so my parents had to take my brother and I to all those. We sort of loved that stuff. And I wasn't unpopular in school, but I definitely liked to sort of make up my made up worlds. And I was the kind of kid that was writing a little novel or something, when I was 10, and it was a little fantasy story.
I somehow see you 8 years old sitting in the back of a Starbucks with a French beret reading Kerouac. Am I close?
It wasn't quite that deep, though. I was unbearable in some of those ways, for sure. I got into Sherlock Holmes when I was 9 or 10, and I just loved it. So I had a big book of Sherlock Holmes stories from the library that I'd read.
And so tell me about Colombia and the thesis, the distracted boyfriend. I'm sure everyone knows what that is at this point. It's the guy walking down the street with the girl, and the guy turns around, looks at another girl, and there's 8 billion different memes created from that.
Yeah, so I was working at Know Your Meme kind of out of college, and it occurred to me that, this is the only historical archive that's there for the memes and stuff. So I was kind of I want to study, how you run an archive, how you really deal with those kinds of documents, how you, contextualize them. And so I did this program at Columbia, and it involved writing a thesis. And I was I'd never seen anyone do a deep dive, monograph or whatever, on a single meme, the way people do it, on a single poet or on a single movie or something. Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking of the meme to select, and I was okay, distracted boyfriend. It's a pretty well-known one. And it also it's so clearly about something in society, because it's a picture of a guy ogling a girl, and then his girlfriend is don't do that. So it just seemed like something I could really justify and describe. And then I sort of wrote this thesis and drilled really deep into it. and did some of the stuff like we always used to do in Know Your Meme, which is like finding where it originated and like tracing it. And I just love the internet. I love looking through those old forums and those old social media posts, but then also just tried to do some, like literary analysis of it and be like, what does it mean?
What
How
does
does it
it
work?
what does it mean?
Good question.
Men are pigs? That's what I take away from it. Men are pigs.
Yeah. Yeah, it means men are pigs. But what's interesting is that I sort of felt like there were two types of that meme. There were ones where it was like you as the viewer were kind of like empathizing with the man. And then there were ones where you're like empathizing with the girlfriend, right? So like in that first category, like the first meme of it that ever went viral, the dude is labeled as the youth. The girlfriend is labeled as capitalism. And then the attractive woman that he's staring at is labeled as socialism. And so that sort of came from like a lefty meme account. So then kind of the implication there is like, we are the youth, we are with the man. But then you'd see tons like around the time, Hurricane Harvey, I think in Texas was around the time this meme went viral in August 2017. And so I found a few that, had Trump's face photoshopped in over the guy's face. And then the girlfriend is like normal Americans wanting help from a disaster. And the woman in red walking by that he's distracted by is like, bullshit on Twitter. And so there's somewhere it's like you're supposed to empathize with the girlfriend and some with the boyfriend. And that to me is sort of like the meaning is that it's always like slippery, and depending on how people want to use it, it could mean either of those.
And is there
But
some
then
dude
gross.
named Daryl in Austin who's responsible for it? Like, can you trace back to who actually created this thing?
Well, okay, so the one behind the viral one, and this is what's interesting about it to me, like August 2017, it's some account that's like at NM161 that seems to be like German language. But since, 2017, the original post has been deleted and taken down.
Mm.
And so that's kind of the guy who's behind the August whatever. But the first use of that meme format is from January of that same year. And it's in a Turkish language prog rock Facebook group of like Turkish guys who are like fans of Phil Collins. And the first ever distracted boyfriend.
That sounds like, you remember the
Yeah.
the Bill Hader, Stefan, like it's got everything. It's got Turkish guys into Phil
Exactly, yeah. No, and it's like that was my favorite part of Know Your Meme. And my favorite part about, I guess, like studying memes now is that you just stumble into these sides of the internet where it's like, here are 40,000 Turkish dudes who love Phil Collins. You're just like, welcome to the world.
All right.
There's all these little niches.
I'm gonna take a wild guess to say they haven't gotten laid in a long time. That's just my guess. But so let's talk about the elephant in the room. Your recent Bill Maher appearance, just for a couple of minutes. A lot of people, myself included, became aware of you from that appearance. There was a moment from it that went viral. You were the opening guest interview, and at one point, Bill Maher, a bit oddly, in my opinion, asked you about the quote unquote ill effect on kids in school of trans visibility and discussion of trans in schools. And you said something like, I'm not an educator and neither are you. You're a talk show host or something. And his immediate reaction was, well, fuck you. And then he laughed. What went through your mind when you were watching his reaction and hearing his reaction? I mean, it looked to me like a guy who's not speechless quite often and is pretty arrogant, that he was at a loss for words because you nailed him. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I've thought about it a lot since because it was like my first time on TV too. And going into it, I'd sort of had conversations like with the producers or whatever. They hadn't like promised me this, but I'd sort of been like, okay, Bill Maher, like he's always talking about either Trump or trans people. And I'd kind of been like, I don't want to end up being, the lefty or whatever who's like standing up for trans people or whatever while he's saying whatever. And they'd been like, oh, he doesn't seem that interested in that angle of it. And then lo and behold, in the middle of the interview, totally normal up till then, he starts asking about the trans thing. And so I'd sort of been like, the way I felt I needed to do that was just to kind of shut it down because I just don't think that's a productive conversation. I don't think it is not like an area of expertise of mine. And like, of course, like with my generation and where I grew up, it was like very normal for me to like know and hang out with trans people. And so for me, that whole political conversation of like, oh, the schools are being indoctrinated or whatever, like it's just not factually true. And then also it's like these are like normal, chill people to me. Like I bet for him or a lot of people, there's sort of this like news abstraction, you know, and they're kind of prejudiced in some ways, I guess. But so I just kind of wanted to shut it down. And I tried to do that. And I think he ultimately let me win that exchange. Because one thing I sort of felt looking at him, and it's a very like close one-on-one, like I'm making eye contact with him, was that he was extremely watchful of me and the audience. And he's of course been doing that for 30 years. But it really was like the feeling of like I did theater in high school, and like when you have a stage partner and you sort of like know that person is watching you and they might be saying something, but ultimately like if your two characters are arguing in a scene, but like the ultimate goal is to like you're working together to make something. And so I think he kind of tried to steer it into good TV. And so I don't know if he was speechless. I don't know if he decided seeming speechless was like the best thing to do in that moment, or if he actually was. I do think he was a little surprised probably that I like pushed back. And then everyone was very kind about it afterwards. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. Like so much of our era is like so-and-so owns so-and-so, or like these sort of gladiatorial whatevers. And in a little bit of a way, that's like the TV genre. And I think on like social media, people do that. But
well, you know, the thing is, as you said before, like certain subjects today are a minefield. And sometimes people try, especially on TV interviews, people try to lull you into that and in this like, you know, gotcha moment or whatever. But for what it's worth, I have to say, if you were 60 years old and had spent 40 years in politics, had a team of consultants, and were paying like a crisis management team $5,000 an hour, you couldn't have had a better comeback for him. It was beyond perfect because you didn't take the bait, you didn't fall into the trap. You literally said the exact and only thing that one should have said in that moment. This is out of my fucking wheelhouse and it's out of yours, you know? And that's why I think his response, rather than, well, that's a good point, Aidan, maybe it was, well, fuck you. I mean, that's the only thing he could come up with. So at the very least, on the surface, you definitely rattled him. And you should have, not intentionally to rattle him, but it was kind of a ridiculous question. And you really said something that was truthful, thoughtful, and inclusive and humble. You didn't try to pretend to know things that you don't know. The fact that you did that at 26 is incredibly impressive. There are people, like I said, spend a lifetime in this business and still, I mean, people run for president, as we know, and can't answer a freaking question about trans, right? And so how did it feel for someone who's in the meme business to kind of sort of become a meme yourself? What was that like?
I mean, it felt... There's a weird process of it in that I'm very used to like a video of me going viral, and from TikTok, you know, I have 150,000 followers, and every now and then I have a video with like more views than that one got. And people kind of using it in ways that I didn't plan, either positively or negatively. Like I remember I had a video and I had a duet stitch of it, someone saying like, it's interesting that this video came out, you know, when Mercury was in retrograde and like Uranus was at this point in the sky. And I was like, not my intention, but happy you got that out of it, you know? Right. But yeah, like seeing it go around and seeing myself be a figure in it, it's a little bit of an out of body experience. And I find myself just sort of always thinking about how I could have done better a little bit. You know, I kind of have this habit of looking at the ground, I think, when I'm talking, thinking, and nervous. And I have like a really sort of a large brow. And my favorite comment on that video when it went viral was a physiognomy check failed, not listening to a word Aidan Walker says, which I suppose means that, you know, I have too much of like a Neanderthal type, you know, skull shape. So I kind of, I guess that
unless you told me, and I still don't see it.
Yeah.
But
I find it entertaining to see all the ways people respond.
Well, people just say the dumbest shit online now. It's crazy. Like they just have to be critical. And sometimes they're sharp and edgy and witty in their criticisms, but other times it's just stupid. He gave you the perfect compliment too, in a way. He said, I have people on this show a lot older than you, and you really held yourself. And so I think he was generous and gracious in that regard. He knew that he had been bested, and he took it in good spirit. He was a good sport. But do you think, because when I watched it, I was like, here's this 26-year-old kid. And I've got a almost 22-year-old daughter. I've got other children in their 30s. So to me, everybody's a kid. But here's this 26-year-old kid. Here's Bill Maher, who's a master at this. But it kind of presented this clear generational divide, like this language barrier. Like, he so perfectly symbolized for me what us older people are clueless about on a lot of these issues. And that was fascinating to me. Do you see it that way? Did you see like, wow, this is it? These are the cultural distinctions right here.
I did see it that way. And that was what made it really interesting and also really hard. And that's part of what I respect about him, finding me and inviting me on and having the conversation. And I think he wanted me to succeed, which I really thank him for. But yeah, it always surprises me sort of what the gaps are. And I have to say, like, my impression, like, seeing the set, seeing the audience, like, first time ever on TV or whatever, is it just felt like very strange and foreign to me as well. And the other thing that really struck me was like, I mean, they like fly you out and you stay in a hotel and there's like a incidental for like your meals or whatever. But then you also see the number of people getting paid and salaried to be there. And it's crazy how much money there is in TV compared to like social media. I can get a 1 million view video, which probably, I don't know how many people see an episode of Real Time, but like, and maybe in the podcast world, you feel this too, right? That you'll reach a lot of people and then TikTok will give me like $300 for a 1 million view video, which like I'm happy with.
Right.
I have other ways. I do other gigs and most creators do as well. But you sort of see how like entrenched and like how much of a world it really is. But like for a creator, you're so siloed, and
Right.
sometimes you DM someone and meet them and there's whatever. So that really struck me. And then just, that generational divide of like, he was very curious, but it's almost hard to answer the questions because they sort of come from outside the frame I'm usually working in. So like some of the memes he asked me about, when he asked me about specific memes, like he asked me about like the bean emoji, which as far as I know isn't really a meme, but in the show Adolescence, it is a meme like within the show that the kids use. And so when I was asked to explain that, or like the 100 emoji, it was sort of hard because I was almost like wanting to be like, well, there's memes like this, but these are fictional.
Right.
Like there's a sort of that many people are still engaging with like the media presentation of the topic rather than the topic itself. And like, I guess if I have the opportunity and like the privilege of being someone who can come and like have these good conversations and expose people to it, then like I'm really happy to do it and thankful for the chance. But it is weird to sort of realize that when I'm talking to my audience on TikTok, who most of them are like 15 to 40, I don't have to do that first layer of like, this is this, they just kind of are on the wavelength. And it's really interesting and challenging. And I hope I get it right, that like process of translation. I was kind of garbled those thoughts.
It conjures up the memories of when Congress had its hearings a while back on TikTok and Meta, and like you listen to these geezers, like these people like Chuck Grassley, and he's like, TikTok, what is TikTok? Like, it's comical. It really can be comical. And so it's not surprising that he kind of conflated certain things. But you said on that show that you're old enough to run for Congress, but you won't. Interestingly, you opened yourself up to a whole audience of boomers and Gen Xers and whatever, and people know about you. So for what it's worth, I think if you ever do want to run for Congress, you have a lot of people who, like me, who are way older than you, who know who you are impressed with you, and you probably would have a good run at it. So for the old folks like me, let's take a step back a little. What is a meme? Where does it typically come from?
Right. So a meme to me it's an online trend, and typically you have two pieces to it. the first piece is shared by everybody and widely, spread, reposted. The second piece is individually generated. And kind of every person can take this thing, this image that everybody shares, and put their own little piece on it. So like with Distracted Boyfriend, the collectively shared part is that picture. And then the individual part is the text that people put on.
So let's just even go back for the know nothings like me. Let's say I'm on TikTok. I see the Distracted Boyfriend meme. It's got some text up there. So through the app, you can get rid of that text and just add your own?
Sometimes through the app, like it depends on the platform. So like Snapchat lets you do a lot of that stuff. TikTok has a few like video editing features, but often it's an outside software. So like at the beginning in like 2000s, 2010s would be like MS Paint, Photoshop, Now with TikTok, they have a whole like editing app attached called CapCut that lets you, lets a 13-year-old do crazy editing.
I already need a drink.
Right, yeah. So
I'm already done.
They kind of bake in, ways for you to, like take an image and modify it. And that's the thing people sleep on actually, is everyone's like, oh, TikTok, it's the algorithm. And it's like, yeah, but it's also CapCut, that they invented something around the pandemic, like 2019, 2020. They let every 13-year-old, have like a video editing software that's like about as good as like Premiere or something, but it's on your phone, it's free. Of course, it's collecting tons of data on you. But it just kind of allowed people to pretty seamlessly go off and create these things. They'd see, like you're saying, they'd see a meme on TikTok.
Right.
And then you could just go open up the same thing in CapCut.
But in all seriousness, it seems like there's some degree of experience one needs or aptitude or just an enjoyment of the process. Like, it doesn't sound like the average 60-year-old is going to want to sit down and create memes because it's not as user-friendly, perhaps, as someone putting up their spaghetti dinner on Facebook or, posting a photo of their dog on Instagram. It requires some, which you might think is really simple, but it's kind of not, right? So it's not yet it hasn't reached critical mass yet in terms of its impact as a real communications tool, because it still seems limited to younger people or those who are more technologically oriented.
Yeah, it still seems limited. There is like that technical side of it, like, how do you get the file here, there, edit it, so on and so forth. And like, one of the things that I was saying, like CapCut, the innovation is it made it a lot easier than it was before TikTok to edit short videos. But the other side of it is like knowing like the tradition and the lore and stuff, like knowing what's funny, knowing kind of like how the history is developed and how you could like take something that was popular in 2022 and post it today and people will laugh at it because they remember, or kind of just keeping abreast of these different viral conversations that are popping off. So I do think it is like pretty complicated, and maybe one of the reasons why it feels easy to young people is like, there's all these reports like people are on TikTok like 5 hours a day, like they're getting in the reps, like you do anything 5 hours a day, you're going to get pretty fluent in it. And so I think it does take some amount of like immersion and exposure, but I do think it's like such a diverse, field, because literally everybody's on the internet, right? That there's always going to be, like meme communities that work for all types of different people. And so
yeah, I do.
If you wanted to get into it, I think.
Well, I do political TikTok videos, short little videos, but it's really just very static. Me talking, I add some music and a header. But when I look through other videos, I see things happening, and I'm like constantly saying to myself, like, how do they do that? How are they doing that? And it's like, whatever, So I don't have the time or the patience to like, I certainly don't have 5 hours a day to play on TikTok, but like, it's just not something at this stage in my life I'm going to do. But I would imagine it's a hell of a lot of fun to do it.
It is, yeah. And I never thought I'd like get into video editing, but I honestly kind of learned on CapCut for like my own content. And then, you just like download these effects and stuff and you just put them over into the time bar, and it's really fun to experiment. And I think it's really the slept upon story. I think as social media influencers, like we think they're talented because they're good dancers or they're pretty or they have such relatable personalities, but
it's editing.
A lot of the time it's editing.
Yeah.
It's editing. And they do a new kind of like Emma Chamberlain best editor of the 21st century.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I mean, I look at these things from the perspective of editing, and it really is very impressive.
Yeah, it's hard for me because I like, it's like it takes multiple skills. Like you have to present it, I have to research what I'm talking about, I have to edit it. And to me, like editing is like the one that's most foreign to me and the one that I'm sort of weakest on.
Interesting.
And so I always like want to do more creative stuff with it. And I see other creators who are like really using editing to like highlight a point they're making. And I mean, my field is like I'm just sort of like talking about stuff too, not doing anything too like sophisticated.
So let's talk about that. Walk us through what a meme researcher does.
Yeah, so I had Know Your Meme. It used to be, and I don't work there anymore, but like you'd sort of figure out where a meme originated. So a lot of like internet sleuthing, going through broken links, pages, whatever. And then kind of figuring out, okay, so what was kind of the first viral post after this meme existed? Did a celebrity repost it and make it bigger? What's kind of the narrative there? And tracing that. And then on my own TikTok, I'll film videos where, some meme starts to go viral, and I do that research process. So I find like where it came from, sort of the story of how more and more people started to see it, where it got seen. Distracted Boyfriend was in that Turkish, prog rock Phil Collins community, like all these different routes that it takes through the internet. And then I sort of describe that. And then, I mean, my master's from Columbia is in history and literature. So I guess like learned some like theoretical approaches to like look at art and be like, what does it mean about society? And then I just kind of like take those and put them on sort of the meme story that I've made. So like, I think the reason Bill Maher had me on his show is that I made one of those videos about the memes on the bullet casing that Tyler Robinson used on Charlie Kirk. And sort of was like, okay, this comes from the furry subculture, and kind of went, through that kind of history and process. So it's really fun, but in a way I almost see like what I'm doing as like, I have friends who, kept on school and they're like studying, newspapers in the 1800s and like how, tabloid stories became popular. Then I'm like, I'm just doing the same thing, but with memes.
Well, it's interesting because it's how young people are communicating today. You look at the past and we think about civil rights protests and Vietnam War and other things that young people were very much involved in, traditional protesting and signs and whatever, but this is a very powerful medium. And I think a lot of older people don't really understand that this is how young people communicate. And it is a very effective medium in business, in politics. I mean, Donald Trump got on TikTok and, the rest is kind of history, as we say. But I think that's really, when you look into the future, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where do you see this kind of meme language and style of communication having the greatest impact?
That's a great question. I think why it works so well for people is that it's so interactive. So it's hard to like say what a meme means because everybody gets to use it. There's this piece that we all share, and then there's this little piece that you put on, the image that everyone uses, the text that I want to put on. And then when you're consuming memes, you're often not just like looking at it as if it's a cartoon, you're looking at someone else looking at it. You're reading the comments talking about it. You're reading the way that somebody took this meme format you've already seen elsewhere and put their own spin on it. And then you're saying, do I agree with that spin? And so there's like a really rich conversation going on around and through it. And I see that impact continuing to be felt because, it's a tradition that gets older every day now. It's like there's memes that are 2 decades old that are still popular today. But if you were to ask me like where it would go in 5 years, I think that AI really like is revolutionizing it in ways that are both, good and bad and really complicated. But I'd say that kind of the two frontiers that I see as like the future of internet culture are things like Roblox, where it's a game. I think people are going to start doing like those massive multiplayer games a bit more than, the social media platforms, which in a way are like TikTok is a multiplayer game in a sense, but like Roblox, I think, is where a lot of the energy is going, things like that. And then also live streaming. So I'd see those two in 5 years kind of being the emergence. And I think what I do, like direct video talking to TikTok, writing things on Substack, it's kind of antiquated already. I got called unk the other day, which is the
Really?
slang term for old on social media.
Yeah, you got to get with the program, Aidan.
I know. I'm falling behind. Like it's inevitable.
Please tell me people are not looking at you and thinking you're already uncool. Because if you're uncool, I'm like just bones in the ground. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, they're ruthless out there. Like the comment that always sticks in my mind was I made one of these videos analyzing a meme, and the comment was, maybe memes are just supposed to be funny, Unk. Now that got me. Like,
well,
old man, maybe memes are just supposed to be a joke, and you can't be like analyzing them the way
see,
you
I
are.
think politicians, in particular Democrats, the Democratic Party, would be real smart if they hired a bunch of people like you and transformed how they communicate. Because guys like me have been telling our party for years that you don't know how to message. You don't know how to do bumper stickers. And what is a meme?
Yeah.
It's a fucking bumper sticker. You can have 10 million people looking at it in 24 hours if you do it right. So I think the Democratic Party should really look at memes as the future, especially if you want to engage young people and bring them back into the mix. I mean, young people don't vote the way they should, and it's because they feel like they're not being heard. They're not being spoken to in a language that matters to them, and this is a communication tool. This is language.
Yeah, I agree totally. And I think one part of it would be, hiring people with expertise, like in the fields I study, for like that technical side of it, like producing it well, producing it right. But like the problem existed with bumper stickers, a lot of it is like they are trying to play to a smaller audience, which is often, kind of like donors or other people in the party, or kind of like what the Washington opinion would be. And I say that being from here. And that doesn't really match what most people kind of care about, because like someone in the Beltway would be like, what does that bumper sticker mean? I don't know. That's stupid. But I feel like most Americans like a slogan that is open-ended, that is, exciting, that is funny, that is maybe raunchy, that, is maybe more populist, is something that would resonate. And so I think there's a side of the problem that's like content, and like, Chuck Schumer being,
of course,
older than you, definitely much older.
Thanks, Aidan.
There's the other.
There's not many people out there that are older than me, but thanks for pointing out at least one of them.
Yeah. Some of it is that they're just old, but the other side of it is that I think
he's older
they're
than me. Yeah.
not in touch.
He's got a few years on me. Do you think meme creators deserve recognition as artists or commentators, or is the anonymity part of what gives memes their power?
I wonder about that all the time. I think that the tradition itself certainly like deserves recognition. Like there's stuff going on with memes and like, weird hardcore brain rot edits that, it reminds me of like things I see in like MoMA or whatever, where it's just so conceptual and so interesting and so weird. And so like sometimes people have like the same response they'll have to like, a canvas that's just a stripe. They'll be like, I don't get it. What is it? Memes are there, like at that point of artfulness in many cases. But the anonymity is like really important too, because like I'm saying, often they're not authored by one single person. They're created out of this sort of folk type of people exchanging. And so I guess like with the blues or whatever, there's like famous blues artists, but we kind of know it began as like a bunch of guys sharing and like the oral tradition and all this stuff. And arguably so many art forms are like that, I feel like even movies, people like will know the names of like directors and actors and actresses and, maybe a cinematographer, but, the credit screen is massive at the very end, and memes are the same way.
What do you think is the best meme of 2025 so far? What's your favorite?
Ooh, the best meme of 2025 is, to me, these TikTok video editing trends where like the first one were these 3 clips, one of them like Eye of Ra, where it's sort of this distorted Snapchat filter thing of a guy looking like he has one eye. Then Chopped Chin, which is like a clip from a basketball game, some guy in the audience dancing. And then I Bought a Property in Egypt, which is one of these like, MLM type marketing, advertisements. And creators just take those 3 random clips and just reassemble them in these crazy collages. And there's throughout this year, I think there's been a lot of advances in like crazy video collage memes like that, where it's just random pieces of content from the internet, pieces of junk that just get taken and, bent and distorted and turned into something wild. So I'd say I bought a property in Egypt would be the search term to get to these edits.
And so if I went out on the street and I went up to a lot of young people and I mentioned the meme you just mentioned, they would know this is like a widely known thing.
So it depends on the young people. Like it's always there was a trend recently that was like people would come up with these binders of like weird memes printed out, and they'd wear a GoPro and they just go to different people in public and like without speaking point it out. Like that. And you see some of the people in public like recognize the memes and are happy and get it, and others are just kind of like weirded out, even young people. So I think it depends on who you reach out to. I will say it maybe is a little bit pretentious of me to bring up like, yeah, I bought a property in Egypt memes, because it's a little bit like being, hey, the only movies I watch are A24 movies. It's kind of like like an art meme, I guess. But yeah.
What's with A24? Is that a thing?
Oh, like the studio that produces,
No, but I mean, like, are they known among young people as only doing certain kinds of films, or?
Yeah, they're kind of like the indie artsy production company to people, I think.
So that's what
they make all
like the only watching indie films. Got it. You mentioned before the inscriptions on bullets. That's really a new and kind of chilling phenomenon. Like, is that how these people who go out and commit these horrible crimes, is this the standard means of communicating their motivations now?
My sense would be yes. There was so much attention paid to, Luigi Mangioni's inscriptions on his bullet casings.
Right.
And I sort of see that as a clear, precursor.
That's kind of where it started, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure like historically people have done that before. But I think like what's so interesting to me about a lot of this stuff is there's one narrative, there's sort of three narrators for people. One is like law enforcement that'll say, hey, we released these pictures of the bullets, or we say what's on them, and they do that as a media release. Then there's the press that sort of has its, account of that, its synthesis of it. And then there's social media. And I think for all of these sort of recent high profile violent events, the social media narration has kind of unglued from the press narration. Like for Luigi, the NYPD would release these security camera footage that would be like, hey, we need help catching this guy. And everyone on TikTok was like, he's so hot. So there's like they're performing, like reading it totally the way they're not supposed to read it. And it's not the first time people have found a convict hot, but I felt like people, really insisting on like not taking the narrative from the media or law enforcement seriously and like putting their own spin on it. I think that's a little bit, that is more significant to me than actually what happened. It's kind of this refusal to read what the media and law enforcement are saying. And I think with the bullet casings, part of the appeal of that for people is that it's a way of like baking into the press release that like, the governor of Utah will say, like the terminally online thing that will really only play like with that third audience that's online.
Right. Well, my last question, and this is perhaps the most important question, Aidan, the burning question of anyone over 40. Are you ready, Aidan?
Yes.
All right. What the fuck is 6'7"?
6'7". It's empty. That's kind of the point of it. Like, this is what I mean by, in a way, it's like one of those crazy works of art you see at the museum, and you're like, it's a shoe. What does it mean? Or like, oh, it's just a blank canvas that someone ripped. My 5-year-old could make that. In the case of 6'7", like 5-year-olds literally did make it in a way. And that it's just, there's like a rap song and then using the word 6'7", and that got popular with some NBA player who was 6'7", and it kind of just became a phrase there. And then kids gaming at places like Roblox and other platforms just started saying it. But I think a lot of the people who say it have like no sense of that whole, derivation, that it's, originally kind of a NBA culture, gaming culture thing. And then like the 6'7" voice is this creator Hoopify on TikTok, who's probably my age or a little bit older. He's also behind the Baby Gronk rizzed up, Livy Dunn rizzed up Baby Gronk meme if you encountered that one.
You might as well be speaking Turkish. We could be playing Phil Collins right now, and you're a Turkish guy. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
He's just a dude. He does like a funny voice.
I literally now feel like I'm 120.
That wasn't my intention. I was trying.
That's all right. I'm a secure man. I'm secure in my senior citizenship. Wow.
It's an honored position. But the point is 6'7" means nothing. And so the fact that it's gotten this popular while meaning nothing is kind of the joke.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, is part of the appeal is that it makes people like me crazy, walking around going, what the fuck is this? What is it? And parents are like, is your kid doing it? Yeah, my kid's like, what does it mean? Like, is that part of the get? Like to just drive older people crazy?
I think that's half the get. Yeah. To drive older people or anyone who doesn't know it crazy. But then once you do know it, then you're able to go like 6'7", and you're like in on it, and you get to make other people crazy like that.
See, if I did it, my daughter would be like, Dad, shut up. Okay. Just don't do that in public, please.
Quite possibly, yeah. But parents say that to their kids as well, and they keep doing it in
That's
public.
True. Aidan, this has been a lot of fun. You're a very impressive young man with a bright future ahead of yourself. I hope you'll come back and talk with us again.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhiniecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Lengyel. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.